Hej och välkomna till Udda, Ting, en podcast om sällsamma historier, kreativitet och kreatörerna själva. Jag heter Henrik Möller och musiken är komponerad av Testbild och den fina loggan till podden är skapad av Malmökonstnären Klaus Kinski. Det här avsnittet ska handla om regissören William Malone och en av de stora glömda science fiction skräckfilmerna som aldrig blev av, Dead Star. 1996 köpte jag en bok, H.R. Giger Filmdesign. Den handlar om konstnären Giger som skapade Alien, hans olika filmdesignsprojekt efter Alien. I den boken fanns ett orealiserat projekt vid namn Dead Star, en sorts Hellraiser i rymden, om det säger något. Det var annorlunda mot de andra orealiserade projekten i boken som bara hade en eller två stycken skisser. Här var massa skisser och stora airbrush-målningar. Projektet hade alltså gått långt in i förproduktionen. Detta berodde på att Giger var god vän med regissören William Malone och de hade båda jobbat på detta projektet som de brann för. Det skulle senare visa sig att Dead Star, som senare gavs ut med fullständigt omskrivet manus och flera miljoner över budget och med flera regissörer som kommit och gått för att sedan sluta med att regissören Walter Hill tog bort sitt namn från filmen i ren skam. Filmens regissör står då benämnd som Alan Smithee. Alan Smithee är ett namn som regissörer sätter på filmer då de tar bort sitt namn av missnöje. Ett litet urval av filmer regisserade av så kallade Alan Smithee är följande: Solar Crisis från 1990, uppföljaren till Hitchcock The Birds Part 2, National Lampoons Senior Trip från 1995, Hellraiser Bloodline från 1996 och Mighty Ducks The Movie 1997. Flera år senare skrev jag till regissören William Malone och bad att få läsa originalmanuset till Dead Star. Det fick jag. Och där började mitt intresse för en av de kända filmerna som aldrig blev av. Det finns ju numera flera dokumentärer om sådana katastroffilminspelningar som till exempel Alejandro Jodorowskis Dune, dokumentärfilmen även kallad Jodorowskis Dune, om när han skulle försöka få till en filmversion av Frank Herberts kända bok Dune. Lost Soul, The Doom Journey of Richard Stanley som handlar om hans version av The Island of Dr. Moreau med Marlon Brando i huvudrollen. Jag önskar att någon kunde göra en dokumentärfilm om Dead Star, om inte annat för att lyfta fram detta bortglömda mästerverk. Jag intervjuade regissören William Malone om hans karriär som monstereffektsmakare till manusförfattare och regissör samt hans vänskapliga relation till konstnären H.R. Giger.
Well, a lot of people were influenced by H.R. Giger. Would you tell me a little bit about how you first met him?
Right. Well, here's the thing: is we, as a company, the Donpo Studios, the company I worked for, what we made was really movie-based masks and props and things that we would sell to the public. This actually started a long time ago when even before I started working there, they had merchandising stuff from like Universal, like Frankenstein and Dracula and the Mummy and all that stuff. And then later we had merchandising from 20th Century Fox. We got like Planet of the Apes. And then they sent us a brochure on a movie called Star Wars, which nobody had ever heard of. And we looked at those pictures and we said, well, I don't know if this movie's any good or not, but we can sell this stuff like crazy. So we got the first merchandising. We arranged the first licensing agreement on Star Wars. And then Fox, of course, liked us a lot because we were making apparently good decisions. And they sent us information on Alien. And I was actually supposed to sculpt the face hugger for manufacture, for mask making and so forth. And he came down and came into where I was working, which was in the basement of 20th Century Fox, because it was very clandestine because they didn't let out any pictures of the alien or any of the stuff. So, but we sort of got on right away, and I sort of stayed in contact with them, and later wound up developing a couple projects with them, which unfortunately never got made, but I wound up spending time with him in Zurich on one of the projects, which was Dead Star. He was a great guy to work with.
How did the story for Dark Star come about? How did you think up the story?
Well, I was thinking about I had an idea for a long time about that maybe death, that maybe when you died and, people going to hell, maybe that was actually a physical place, that it wasn't necessarily spiritual as much as it was a physical place you could go to. And I thought, well, what if aliens had come up with some sort of device that was able to take you to hell, if you will, or open up a portal to hell. And that was the genesis of it. And I thought that maybe it'd be kind of cool as if we took the idea basically of the movie Dead Calm and reset it in space, where you have a mission where they're out in space and they're there to find out what happened to a crew that disappeared years ago, and when they get there, there's like a ship that's coming towards them, and on board is this crazy guy who's got like this device that's capable of taking you to hell.
The Thanatron device from Dark Star, how did you think up this idea, and how did the idea evolve? Did you work with Giger on it back and forth?
My original idea was, like I said, it was a device, it was an alien device of some sort that the aliens had created that would basically transport you to hell. When I thought of it originally, it was much more sort of probably something more electronic or actual mechanical that you'd recognize as being mechanical. Now, Giger, being the kind of character he was, he did designs that were just like, you just go, I don't even know what that is. But I like that. I like the idea that he'd come up with this like sort of organic version of it that was like very wacky. I mean, he used to send me just crazy drawings. I mean, he sent me one whole pages of just holes. He goes, yes, I sent you pictures of assholes and holes of all kinds, buttholes and holes in the ground. And so he had this just kind of crazy idea, but some of his ideas were just so wonderful. And we came very close to getting it made. It was, and this was a movie that I spent, a couple weeks with Giger, in Zurich designing the stuff, and then we would have long conversations. He sent me many, many sketches and so forth. And I was very keen on making it. But what happened was the production company kept coming to me and saying that they wanted it bigger and bigger. And it came to me to be obvious that at some point you make it too big and a couple things are going to happen. Either it's not going to get made, or if they do make it, they're not going to make it with me at the time because, I was still a fairly unknown director. And so, so the film wound up not getting made. And consequently, the script circulated around town for a long time, and there was a lot of fans of the script, and they liked it. And unfortunately, when you have that happen, you wind up your script getting, pieces of it stolen or, used in other things. And there's a movie most notably called Event Horizon, which is basically they took our entire premise and made a movie on it. Although I don't think that it's as good a movie as I think what we would have made, particularly with Giger involved. I think it would have been a much cooler movie. I left and actually didn't even think about it anymore because you kind of have to put those things behind you because it's just too painful otherwise. So I just moved on, and then I think it was like 9 years later when I was about to do House on Haunted Hill, I get a check in the mail that they'd sold the script to somebody else to make it, and it became Supernova, which I don't think there's much left of my original screenplay in there.
This must be genre-wise, as in terms of budget-wise, genre-wise, this must be probably the biggest Alan Smithy movie ever made.
I do know that they went through a number of directors and did numerous rewrites, and it was kind of nice because after the fact, I got a letter from Francis Coppola saying that he wished they'd gone back to my original screenplay. So that was rather nice. So
A little bit too late, too little too late, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you get awards at the end of your life, you know, as a filmmaker, you go, no, why did you give me that like 30 years ago, you know?
Could you give a little advice about things to avoid?
You know, it's really hard because, you know, the thing is that when you write something like that, I mean, you know, you want to send it out because you need to get it made. But at the same time, when you're sending it out, people are reading it. And, you know, I've had many projects that either the entire project or pieces of them have been lifted and by big people till you go, why would they bother, you know, lifting from me? But they do, you know, so it's just part of it. And I guess you just have to figure if you can make enough stuff that, you know, that you'll still wind up, you know, getting the things made that you want to get made, then I guess that's all you can do, really. There really isn't any way of getting around it. You know, I know lots of people, they'll put on the front of the cover of their scripts, you know, with all kinds of copyright notices, but nobody's stupid enough to steal your entire script. They're just going to, like, you know, mine it for the ideas and so forth. Look, I taught film a couple of years ago at a film school, and what I told my best advice to young filmmakers is you have to make a film. You can't make a film that's good. You can't make a film that's great. You've got to make a film that blows people away, that when they see it, they just go, I have to have this person. That's all you can do, because that's the only way you're going to get ahead. Because there's so many people out here, it's so competitive, and there's so much going on, and also, you know, a big part of the film business here, of course, is well, like you've heard of, you know, who you know, and you know, being networking and really knowing a lot of people, and that's a big part of it. So a lot of times, I think the biggest mistake people make is that they think that if you work hard and you're just good, you know, you're going to get ahead, and it's just not the case here. You know, you have to be blessed in some fashion by the Pope. And what I mean by that is I was lucky. I did a TV show called Tales from the Crypt, and I directed an episode which when they gave me the episode, it was considered like what they call a box show, which means like their cheapest episode shot in 4 days when everyone else gets 5 days or something to film their half-hour episode. So I got the lowest, the worst episode, but I made an episode that suddenly people, the executive producer, which was a guy named Bob Zemeckis, who you probably know from Forrest Gump and all the rest of that, he saw it and was going around saying that it was like the best Crypt episode and so forth. And because of that, in other words, you know, I had the blessing, you know, which is that suddenly, you know, I had agents coming out of my rear end, and they were just, you know, there was a lot of interest, and that's really how you have to get ahead. You know, it's very, very hard. So you have to make a film that really makes a mark in film festivals or somewhere that it just gets a lot of press and gets a lot of interest. And that's really the only way you're going to get ahead.
Could you tell me a little bit about the other projects, not that start, but the other projects you mentioned that you worked on with Giger, what they were about?
Yeah, there was a project I had written called The Mirror, which was it's about a portal to another dimension, and that's a dimension of where a machine world exists, and they're trying to recreate humanity, and they sort of are reaching out from this mirror, which is not really a mirror, but it looks to us as though it's a mirror, but it's actually a portal, dimensional portal, and they capture a couple people and take them off into their world, which is of course the H.R. Giger world. And I'd become friends with Giger enough that at this point I really wanted to make a movie where we recreated this stuff in really large scale. I wanted to, like, you know, do a lot of his great paintings and make them full size, and, bigger even than the sets that they made for Alien. I wanted to make them really spectacular. And Giger was very much on board for that and was very enthusiastic about it. And we came very close to getting it made, but it's just one of those things, your dream projects oftentimes don't get made, and it's sad, but it's what happens. So
yeah.
If you like something too much, that's a bad sign, I guess, in Hollywood anyway.
As you tell me the story of Mirror, it sounds a bit like the old video game that came out in the 90s that was called Darkseid. Does that have anything to do with it?
Actually, I've only seen the cover. I have never played it. I have really no idea of what the actual film or the game is actually about, so I couldn't tell you.
Well, I played it when it came out in the early 1990s, and what I remember from it is exactly what you told me, a guy walking through a mirror and entering the H.R. Giger world.
Well, I guess I should have sued him. In a way, I feel kind of bad that we were never able to do those films, because I think the stuff that he did with Alien, of course, it's wonderful stuff, but it just scratches the surface of what could have been done with Giger's stuff. And that's what I feel kind of sad that I couldn't have been part of it, but at least I wish somebody would have been part of it and actually made that stuff real.
You've always been a very creative person. How did you start out?
I started, I guess, as a lot of, people who are interested in the genre started. So I started by making little films when I was very young. Somebody gave me an 8mm camera and started shooting little horror films and so forth. And later became a sculptor and painter, so my background is really more in art than anything. And then got a job doing special effects for a company that made Halloween masks and special effects for films. And then ultimately decided to get back into making movies. So, that was really the beginning of it.
Could you tell me a little about your debut horror film, Scared to Death? How did that come about?
I was working at a company called Donpo Studios, and there were guys that would come in who were directors, and at that time, and they would come in to hire us to make things for their movies. And at that time, there were very few people who were directors who liked the genre. They were mostly people who hated the genre and were directing the movies only because they thought they were slumming, or they were hoping to do something better, quote, better. And but I really was sort of frustrated with that attitude. And there were a few directors. It was like Tobe Hooper and John Carpenter who took it seriously and thought of it as an art form. And so I decided to stop making effects stuff and, mortgage the house, and so forth, and make a little horror film, make my own horror films.
Yeah. Could you tell me a little bit about the movie and the genesis of the idea of the film, the story for the idea? Because people are listening to this might not know anything about it.
Well, Scared to Death is basically, a monster on the loose kind of movie, And really, when I started thinking about making my first movie, it occurred to me, if you're making a low-budget movie, you really have to think about what can you bring to the party that is something that would normally cost somebody a lot of money, something that's special that you can do that you can make, add some production value. And at that time I could make monsters, so I thought, well, I should make a monster movie, and that was really the sort of beginning of it. And I had the conversations. I had a friend. We used to talk a lot about science and so forth, and we were thinking about genetically created monsters. And so that was the idea, would be a genetically created monster that would get loose and start killing people. And initially, because it hides in the sewer system, people don't know how it's killing people, and it's sort of like people think for a while that it's a psycho killer or something.
Okay, if we move on chronologically, how about Creature? Could you tell me a little bit about the story and how the film came about, and working with Klaus Kinski?
Well, Creature actually got made because, this was right after I'd made Scared to Death, and a producer named Moshe Diamant wanted to make a movie that he wanted to make a movie like Alien, and I'd heard that was the case, and so I had actually a story that I had been kicking around with me for a while, and I thought, well, I better figure out maybe some way of pitching it to him, and it was kind of based on, it was kind of an amalgam of a bunch of science fiction films from the 50s, It, The Terror from Beyond Space, and a little bit of The Thing, and a bunch of, and actually it's in a way kind of a prequel to Forbidden Planet, because we have a Krell lab in the film that's destroyed. And as you may or may not know, I was a big collector on Forbidden Planet, and I actually had a lot of the props from that film, and so it was very easy and inexpensive for us to just reuse those things. So we used that as kind of a story idea that our heroes land on one of the moons of Saturn and discover a Krell lab that's been destroyed. I did a painting of just a quick painting overnight, because I had a meeting the next morning, and I had a painting that I did. It was like artwork for the ad campaign, and I took it to Moshe, and he said, "Oh yeah, we have to go make this," So we got into production on it very quickly. About 2 weeks away from production, he says, "By the way, I hired Klaus Kinski to be in your movie." And, I had known Klaus Kinski's reputation, being a madman. And there was no part in the film for Klaus Kinski. I mean, there just wasn't, And so I realized I had to write one really quickly. So I wrote in a part for Klaus. And I thought, well, if he's this crazy, maybe I better just make him a crazy guy in the story. And, of course, he turned out in real life to be 10 times crazier than the part I wrote for him. So... And I had never worked with a troublesome actor before, so that was trial by fire, I can tell you.
Could you tell me a little bit about any anecdote about working with him, in which way he was troublesome, so to speak?
Well, I mean, he would want to have an argument between every shot. Every time you cut the camera, he'd want to have an argument, And the first day of shooting, we walked out onto the set, and he put his arm around me, and he says, "Bill, I just want you to know that when Natasha was 12, I raped her." And I'm sure my brain just melted at that point, because I didn't even know what to do with that, And he was just, he would say things that would embarrass a sailor, He just, he just was a madman and very difficult. And I'm not a screamer, but I had him for about a week, and I think he started on a Monday, and by Thursday, I just decided the only way to deal with him was to yell at him. So I turned and winked at the cameraman, and I turned back to Klaus and just started screaming and telling him he was going to hit his marks, or, and I'd heard about Herzog pulling a gun on us, says, "I'm going to shoot you." That's the, and so he was a pussycat for the next 2 days. But I have to say, he lit up the screen when he was on camera,
Well, the film I would like to talk about is one of my favorite films of yours. It's Parasomnia. Could you tell me a little bit about how the story came about and the production?
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you like that film. It's really my favorite thing that I've done, and it's the nearest to my heart because I really wanted to make a movie, kind of a dark fairy tale. Actually, it really came about because I was watching The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and as I'm watching it, I'm thinking to myself, man, there's at least another good movie in here, or 2 or 3, just in the ideas. And I thought, nobody's really made a good sleepwalker movie about somebody who's a sleepwalker. And I thought, so I started doing research on it, and I came across this article about this girl who'd been asleep for 20 years, and she only woke up every now and then. And I thought, wow, what must her life be like, So I thought, well, she obviously dreams. Well, what does she dream about? And I got the idea, well, what if somebody controlled her dreams, and her dreams were like our life, and when she woke up, she thinks that's her dreams. And so that was the spin of the movie. The idea was that when she was dreaming, that was her reality. So I thought, well, maybe there's this guy who's in love with her, who's like the psychopath, and he's able to actually inhabit her dreams. Genesis of it. So I sat down and wrote it. And it's interesting because after I got done making the film, in fact, I had happened to see Splash, and I realized that Splash is like the brighter side of that movie. It's like it's kind of a weird. It's really kind of the same movie in a way, but it's just like that's the comedy version, and Parasomnia is the dark version of that, I guess.
It just strikes me when you pitched it to me, the story, that it sounded very much like Nightmare on Elm Street, but it really isn't. It's very far from Nightmare on Elm Street. Could you tell me a little bit about how you came up with the main villain of the story, and were you inspired by any typical artwork?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had the artwork really came out of I became aware actually when I was doing Fear.com in Luxembourg. The production designer threw a book on my desk by a guy named Czesław Baczynski, the Polish artist, and I was just taken with his stuff. And unfortunately, in that movie, there was no place to use that stuff. But I said, I've got to do a movie with this guy at some point. Sadly, he was murdered before I got a chance to do Parasomnia, but I never forgot it, and I was really taken with this stuff and tracked down the people who owned the rights to his film, his artwork rather, and was able to get the rights to use it in my film, and I was greatly honored by that because I think it's just wonderful stuff. And apparently, Baczynski wanted to do film work. He really wanted to have his artwork put in film. So I think in some ways it all turned out to be.
Om jag uttalade rätt, Władysław Kinski, född 1929, var en exceptionell konstnär i klass med Hieronymus Bosch som målade mardrömslika gestalter och landskap. En helt unik röst, lite grann i likhet med H.R. Giger, som tyvärr blev knivhuggen till döds i sitt hem för några 100 polska zloty år 2005. Så gå gärna ut och googla Kinski art, så kommer ni få se fantastiska bilder.
But yeah, as far as the villain goes, I wanted to have a villain that was smart. It's funny though, but I did get slagged by some critics for him having hypnotic powers, and I thought, are you not familiar with horror, literature and films? I mean, that's not even.
But I don't understand the criticism. What was the criticism?
They were criticizing the fact that they thought, that his hypnotic powers were like silly or beyond the realm of anything that anybody could do or anything. That it was too fanciful. And I thought, come on, Dracula.
Also, you had the privilege of working with Sean Young, the actress best known for her role as Rachel in Blade Runner.
Sean Young, we've all heard stories about Sean, but I found her to be just a dream. She showed up on time. She did a good job. She was never complained. And this was a low budget movie. We didn't have the trailers and all of the stuff that she was normally used to. And she was just a doll. She really was. And the scenes, like when she goes over the building, she was really, a good sport about, like all of the stunts she had to do and hanging on wires and, everything that she went through. So I thought she was great. I would work with her anytime. I mean, I know she probably has difficulty sometimes in her private life, and maybe that spills over, but certainly didn't with us. And I'd say give me 10 Sean Youngs. So.
I have to say thank you very much, Bill, for taking your time. It was wonderful talking to you. I've been wanting to do this for a long time.
Well, it's great talking with you, and I hope I get to visit Sweden sometime.
Ja, det var allt för den här gången. Jag heter Henrik Möller och musiken är skriven av Testbild.